So in this video, I'm going to speak into who is the 22 movement man who joins the Men's Cove or 22 movement program. And that is distinct from a man who may take on the practices. So one can do the practices without necessarily being part of the program. So for me, this is about leading from the front and leading by example and coming from my own personal experience, and then creating a container with other men who are up for a similar journey, and men who I can learn from, and men who I can support, and men who I can support to develop as leaders in their own lives and as leaders of other men. One of the most beautiful distinctions that I got, and actually only relatively recently, was that instead of thinking of this as a structure, what the practices are the rhythms of our lives. And what's beautiful about that is when I first came up with evolution over 20 years ago, I structured it as a 4-week cycle, and the idea was that it would be the cycles of the moon, female menstrual cycle. I was aware of these, cycle of the seasons, and I felt that it would absolutely make sense to integrate into that. So the kind of kernel of the practice is to come up with the pillars, the traditions, the rituals that create the rhythms of our life. And those things are daily, weekly, fortnightly, monthly, quarterly, annually, and periodically. A perfect example of one of those pillars for me would be meditating twice a day. And that meditation gives me a flow to my day. I have a sense of how my morning will go and how my evening will go, literally by referencing my schedule. In my own life, in that structure, I have about 40 pillars. A perfect pillar for me would be dinner and martial arts training with my sons twice a week. All of those give my life the feel of what it is. The second component is our ways of being. And that is very distinct from what we're doing or what I'm doing. As men, and I'm not even sure it's necessarily as men, and also maybe even as people, but the notion of the integrated masculine and feminine, or really knowing when to be hard and when to be soft, when to be really, really clear and down the line, and when to be open and really listen. The idea of the integrated masculine and feminine was probably best explained to me once by a martial arts teacher come guru come rabbi, who said to me that when you find an injured baby bird that has fallen from its nest, sometimes the thing to do is to take that bird home and to nurture it back to wellness and set it free. And sometimes it's to recognize that what that bird needs is for you to break its neck. And that is the art of life. And that always stayed with me, is that whole notion of the hard and the soft, the straight line and the circle. And that is the other component of what we are learning in the program. It's also an opportunity for men to network, create friendships, connect in community, a safe space for sharing, celebrating victories, talking through challenges, getting advice. And a lot of those things are what a man would get from a traditional men's group circle, which is why it is also recommended for a man in the program that he also considers a men's circle practice as well. So if I was asked the question by a man, what if I needed to choose or had to choose between the two? My answer would be just getting really clear of the distinction. The distinction for a men's group is a really safe container to share, to be witnessed, to be reflected, to serve other men. Men's Cove, or 22 movement, is a structure for a man to really take himself on and live at his edge. And I love that idea. I think that's one of the big distinctions for me, of like a man at an edge and then constantly just expanding that edge, versus this idea of, creating a habit in 28 days, or, you can do anything and then you're transformed. In my own experience, it is a step-by-step, slow journey. But if you consider that this is somebody now, and you expand and expand and expand and expand, there's also going to be a contraction, expansion, contraction, expansion, expansion, expansion. Then that circle of influence, as Covey puts it so aptly in 7 Habits, that just grows. So that is part of a key part of what the program is about. And then I guess the other is a little bit of a life philosophy, which is, my reference is 2 things for this. M. Scott Peck's, life is difficult. And once we get that life is difficult, that is the liberation, because we know then that it can be no other way. And said slightly differently for me, I always like the analogy of the rugby game, where the rugby game, to be a full and complete rugby game, has both the beauty of the amazing try and the free-flowing wing and the beautiful kick, and then it also has the scrum and the ruck and the man lying in mud who can't breathe, who is getting his shins scraped and his back scraped and he's bleeding. And that is just the whole process of how life works. And so the program supports men in all elements. So celebrating the victory of the amazing kick, however that is, the birth of a child, an amazing win in business, and then also the challenges, and they can be really petty, but when a man in data speak comes home and hasn't bought the milk and his wife freaks at him, or whatever it might be, and a space for that. So all of that comes through in Men's Code. And it would be extraordinary for me on a personal level to create this as a process with men. And I think in completion, I wrote a vision for myself of the man that I'm living into, and I've called him the coolest old guy in Avalon. And I realized today actually that with women it's a cougar and I'm a koga, and that is the man that I'm committed to living into. And that is an experience that starts now or before and is lived into. It's not something that happens at end of days. So it's about surrounding myself with men who can support me in that vision. So if you feel like you're up for the 22 movement journey and you're the man, I recommend being in touch with me, and we can structure it in so that you can come for a trial and get to experience what it is. And I think that is the key way to do all things. Experience it, and then you can make an informed decision, and equally I can make an informed decision. And if we're listening to this video and there's other cohorts and forums happening, then the leader with you decides in a very strong and empowering way whether you're a man for the group. Hope.